I want to spend the next few minutes I have in my opening remarks to offer a reflection on something that has been hanging in the air for me for the last 19 months, but that I have not had time to fully consider. As a lawyer and a political analyst, I've been consumed with responding to developments of the moment and trying to figure out how we can stop the bloodshed and get to a permanent ceasefire, where the current events might be taking Palestinians in the future, and where they might be taking the international system writ large. More than a commemoration, May 15th offers us a moment to stop what we've all been consumed with, take a breath and look back. In doing so, I'm immediately struck with how very strange it is to talk about the Nakba or commemorate it as an event of the past. Of course, it had a beginning. We pinpoint it on May 15th, 1948, but it began before that date and is ongoing, as so many speakers have rightly recognized. It is something that lives and breathes and that has been evolving in its monstrous methods and modalities and growing in its frightening efficiency. The term Nakba was first used to refer to the period between November 29, 1947, when the partition of Palestine was recommended by the General Assembly, and the year following Israel's founding, when over 750,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced from their homes and lands to create a Jewish majority state. The methods to force Palestinian flight involved massacres, rapes, and the threats of the same. However, the displacement of Palestinians from their land inside Israel continued even after 1949. It took the form of controlling and dispossessing the remaining Palestinian population through legal mechanisms and by privileging Jewish nationality over Israeli citizenship. The 1967 displacement of over 250,000 Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza is generally referred to as the Nakba, or shock, but it was a continuation of the Nakba. We know from Israeli archives and the work of Professor Ilan Pappé that the plans to occupy the West Bank and Gaza were prepared in the late 1950s after Israel's temporary occupation of Gaza in 1956, following the French, British, and Israeli attack on Egypt. In 1967, Israeli leaders did not think the same tactics of 1947 through 1949 could be deployed to force the remaining Palestinians off their land. They were afraid of the international outcry. And so other mechanisms were used: land confiscations, mass detentions, residency revocations, deportation, and movement and access restrictions. All were used to encourage Palestinians to leave. A separate legal regime was put in place to differentiate between Israeli settlers and Palestinians, a regime the World Court has told us in 2024 amounts to apartheid. And since October 2023 in Gaza, we are seeing genocide used as another tactic. In the West Bank, we are witnessing a campaign to depopulate refugee camps and rural communities, amounting to ethnic cleansing. If we agree that the Nakba is ongoing and not a static moment in time, we have to rethink the notion of how we commemorate the day, May 15th. Nakba isn't a single event. It has become a criminal enterprise that began almost 80 years ago, consisting of a series of tactical war crimes aimed at the erasure of the indigenous population of Palestine and their history. Rabia Ighbariya, a Palestinian legal scholar based at Harvard, proposes that we think about Nakba as its own legal concept, including unlawful occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide. These crimes were not linear. They were deployed in cycles and in different moments in time and to different degrees. We should recall in this regard that the UN General Assembly found that the Sabra Shatila massacre in 1982 constituted a genocide against part of the Palestinian people. What is different today is that the mechanisms being used are much more efficient in effecting erasure of Palestinians from their land, and the control over the population is much more severe and complete. Technologies, including AI, mass surveillance systems, tracking and hacking software, facial recognition to control movement and access, and disinformation, misinformation, and censorship online and in traditional media exist today. New technologies have increased the speed and the rate of killing to make the atrocities seen in the last 19 months of the war on Gaza and the ongoing destruction of Palestinian communities in the West Bank and in Lebanon and Syria much more deadly than the crimes committed between 1947 and 1949. But there is something else going on beyond the control and removal of Palestinian communities. How has it been possible after the lessons of World War II and its atrocities that Western governments have been effectively silenced or immobilized in responding to the atrocities going on in Gaza and around the Middle East? How is it that so many of them continue to transfer weapons for those atrocities or still refer to Israeli actions as self-defense or within the bounds of international humanitarian law? How was this grooming of these states made possible such that they could not only accept the atrocities being committed today in Gaza and the region, but also work to silence civil society within their own national jurisdictions to prevent them from protesting in support of policy change? How were the laws of war and legal concepts misused and turned on their heads so that everything done by the occupying power became justifiable? These things are part of the criminal enterprise that is the Nakba, and it too deserves to be studied as we rethink what the term Nakba encapsulates. As Rabia argues, Nakba should no longer be thought of as a proper noun. In fact, it is a verb. It involves a series of systemized violent actions conducted over time by a settler colonial regime. But in addition to the series of crimes involved, unlawful occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, and genocide, I believe we also need to begin to examine how international law has been misapplied, disregarded, and undermined as a part of the Nakba of Palestinians in the UN system, within national governments, and against civil society. This, I believe, has been an essential part of the success of the Nakba, the undermining of international law. As Noura said earlier, the failure to protect Palestinian rights is not only a Palestinian catastrophe, it's dangerous to all humanity. How do we right course and recalibrate towards respect for international law is a question that this body, this institution, is uniquely qualified to answer, and it should be a question that's posed to the Global Alliance convening in New York next month. Commemorations of Nakba should not only be a time for looking back and taking stock, they should also be opportunities for collective thinking to understand how the ongoing Nakba is threatening to unravel our international system and what can be done collectively to protect and preserve the UN institutions and universal norms. Thank you.